Semyon was lying on his bed on his phone, scrolling through the news feed. It was already late, so he decided to stop the pointless scrolling and fall into a blissful sleep, thankful that tomorrow was his day off. Putting the phone on the nightstand, he closed his eyes and fell into bed contentedly. In his head, he began to think about future events, a trip to the countryside to his parents, going to the MFC to change his passport, and much more. However, Semyon pushed these thoughts away, deciding that these things were not a big problem. After that, he switched to thoughts about his other half. He began to remember the moments of their today's meeting, berating himself for his behavior. He also remembered one incident from his childhood. After about half an hour of digging in his memory, Semyon decided that it was necessary to stop and firmly decided to free his mind from any thoughts. He stretched, took a more comfortable sleeping position, and prepared to make a second journey into the realm of dreams. He couldn't get rid of the thoughts that were popping into his head, but they seemed vague, and everything was going to make Semyon fall asleep. However, at one moment his heart began to pound frantically. Then he realized that the dream had completely dissipated. After turning over, Semyon became very angry. He had heard that a strong cough could help with tachycardia. He tried this method, and it did work, but not for long. It was already the third hour of Semyon's desperate struggle to sleep. In addition to the tachycardia, the intrusive clanging of the wall clock added to the irritating factors. Semyon almost lost his temper, but then he remembered that the wall clock had not worked for 3 months because of a dead battery. At first he was a little frightened, but then quickly came up with a not quite rational explanation. Maybe something has responded in them. Tomorrow we'll have to look at it. 10 minutes later, he heard a heavy coughing sound that rattled the whole apartment. It frightened him more than the clatter of the clock, but the explanation was just as quick. The soundproofing is terrible. The neighbor is coughing now. His heart began to beat even harder, despite the rationalization of what was happening around him. Semyon decided that he was unlikely to fall asleep and reached for the phone, which had been lying on the nightstand all this time. Finding the phone, Semyon accidentally knocked it off the nightstand and it fell to the floor with a crash. Semyon cursed and reached his hand to the floor to fumble for the phone. However, he couldn't find it, so he decided to turn on the light in the room. He got out of bed, pressed the switch, but the light did not come on. Semyon was ready to panic, but quickly realized that the light was probably off. He immediately fell into bed, covering himself with a blanket. The sound of the wall clock faded. The phone on the floor began to vibrate. Semyon didn't want to get out of bed. His heart began to pound even harder, but he decided to wait until the phone was silent. After a while, the phone went silent. There was no clanging of the wall clock, nor was there any loud coughing from the neighbors. Semyon's pre-sleep state returned to him, and he almost convinced himself that everything that had happened was just the fruit of a ridiculous coincidence. With this thought, he fell asleep. Waking up sometime in the afternoon, Semyon picked up the phone that had fallen during the night and saw one missed call from an unknown number. His first thought was to call it, because despite the fear he had experienced, his curiosity got the best of him. But Semyon decided that it would be better to forget about the whole story, except to look at his watch. Semyon went into the kitchen. He took off the wall clock and put it on the sofa to remove the battery. As soon as he opened the lid, his eyes blurred, and he fell down, unconscious. Semyon woke up in the night, in his bed. The phone was vibrating on the floor. His heart was beating strongly. Semyon, overcoming his fear, decided to pick up the phone and answer the unknown number. "Do not touch the clock," said the mechanical voice on the other end of the wire. However, it was too late. Semyon's eyes closed. His heart was ready to jump out of his chest. The next day, Semyon's relatives sounded the alarm. When they arrived at his apartment, they found him dead. Semyon was lying on his back, his eyes staring at a point on the ceiling. From the kitchen, they could hear the clanging of the wall clock.